and you should be ready to go.
Great, thank you. Let's get started, everyone. I want to welcome you all to this initial meeting of the Colorado Geographic Naming Advisory Board. As you all know, this was created under an executive order of my boss, Governor Jared Polis. So this is a 15-member advisory board charged with evaluating proposals concerning name changes, new names, and name controversies of geographic features and certain public places in the state of Colorado, and then making official recommendations to the governor. I'm very proud that the governor has decided to establish this board within the Department of Natural Resources, and I really look forward to working with you all as we tackle some of these names around the state of Colorado. Really appreciate your willingness to serve. I know you all are very busy in your regular world and the jobs you have and so forth, so just a big thank you for your willingness to participate in this. It is definitely not lost to me that this board is meeting under very challenging times. We will have an opportunity to help Colorado continue to evolve and to be more inclusive and better reflect the diversity and stories of our population and true history through the names of its natural features. It's my expectation that the board will primarily assist and cooperate with the United States Board of Geographic Names. This is otherwise known as BGN, who gives final determinations for standardizing names of geographic and natural features. This initial board meeting will serve as an orientation meeting for us to get to know each other, understand the work of the BGN, and how we relate, and begin to discuss operating protocols. While we will learn from the BGN in a presentation later on today, we definitely have our work cut out for us, and our initial first steps to initiate this process is really to work within this new board and stand it up properly. So a couple of immediate housekeeping items for you all is that all board members, I know we're about how many months within COVID, so I think most of you are familiar with Zoom and electronic meetings, but you have the ability to mute and unmute yourself. So that we're not speaking over one another, I really urge you to mute yourself if you're not speaking, and definitely to minimize background noise and so forth. If you happen to be calling in as well, please to unmute yourself, just dial *6 as a general rule, then you will get back in. So while it's not identified in the agenda, we'll also look for an appropriate time for a short break, for this meeting too. And finally, a friendly reminder that the board meeting is via Zoom, and this is being recorded and will be available for the public as well. My assistant, Johnny Abad, she will be assisting with the Zoom platform and will also be taking notes. But I want to give a shout out and thank to Dion Cole. He's from Parks and Wildlife for assisting to set up this Zoom meeting. And of course, Johnny, for all of your work, to make this meeting happen. So thank you. So that being said, I know we have a lot to discuss at this meeting. So I'd like to start with introductions. Governor Polis is expected to join this meeting at 1:45 today. So depending on where we're at with the conversations, obviously when he gets on, the floor is his. So we'll just have to be, flexible and nimble. But again, he is planning on participating at 1:45 today. So with that, I'd like to start out with introductions. And I have a list in front of me so that not everyone goes, at the same time. And how about I'll start with myself. I'm Dan Gibbs, the Executive Director of the Department of Natural Resources. And I've had this particular position for, I want to say 18 or 19 months now. You blink and time flies by fast, but it's been really a unique opportunity and dream job for me. The DNR, just so you all know, handles most things in the state that deal with land, water, wildlife, minerals, and oil and gas. And we have 6 main divisions within the Department of Natural Resources. And before I was in this current position, I was elected 3 times as a Summit County Commissioner. I live in Breckenridge with my wife and 2 tiny little kids. If I were home right now, one would probably be on my lap. But I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. And then before I was a county commissioner, I served in the legislature, in the Colorado State Senate and the State House. And before that, worked for U.S. Congressman Mark Udall for about 6.5 years, some of that time in Washington, D.C., and some of that time in Colorado. So that's who I am. And I'd love to hear more about you all and some of your backgrounds. And honestly, I really wish that we could all meet in person, because there's nothing like that. But hopefully we'll get to a point where we can do that. And I know, I'll go through the list I have. I know that there are some board members of this that will be kind of in and out. And I think there are some that are not on at this second, but will be joining, pretty soon. So if they're not here, we will come back to them. Do we have Representative Will on the phone? Okay, no, it looks like we do have Representative Benitez. So could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Representative Adrian Benavides, and I represent House District 32 in Adams County, which is the southwest portion of Adams County that borders Denver from Sheridan to Tower Road. I've served 2 terms in the legislature, so we'll be starting another one. I'm an attorney by profession, so I have had an interest in this area in the past. I mean, I'm a Colorado native and have gone to Colorado schools, and I have been really involved in primarily the Chicano and indigenous communities in the Denver metro area. And some of you may know, I know it was in an article, so I'll mention it. I had sponsored for each of the 4 years I was in the legislature the bill to repeal Columbus Day. And we were successful this year, but that was an ongoing challenge by communities over 30 years. So none of this stuff is overnight. I recognize that, and I think this is a time where we need a lot of review of some of the things with the names of places, but beyond that, which is not obviously our charge, but there's some things that over the years, many years, communities and groups have been asking about, and we've been unable to take action. So I'm very pleased that the governor formed this group and that we're going to be able to work on many of these things together. And I read about many of you, and I look forward to working with each of you in this process.
Great. Thank you so much, Representative. Next, we have Representative Exum. If Representative Tony Exum is here. Okay. Okay, next we have Boulder City Council member, Junie Joseph. Okay.
And she's on the phone. Hold on just a second.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll unmute her here. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Thank you for this opportunity. It's great to meet all of you. I'm a Boulder City Council newly elected on November of 2019. I am a 3rd year graduating senior from the law school. I've lived in Colorado now for about 2 years. I was born in Haiti, but I grew up here in the United States. Been living here for over 20 years. I'm excited to be part of this board, and I look forward to getting to know all of you and also getting to the work at hand. So it's truly a pleasure.
Great. Thanks so much. We're really glad that you can participate in this. Next up, we have Kathy Ritter.
Kathy, it looks like just joined. I just wanted to say hi. I'm Leslie Hilton. I'm the Director of Government Affairs with the Office of Economic Development and International Trade. And I'm sort of standing in for Kathy as she's hosting GovCon right now, which is the annual Governor's Conference on Tourism. So Kathy, are you in a place to now introduce yourself?
Yes, I am.
Creating some substantial investments.
Backstage at Red Rocks with our Governor's Tourism Conference.
Hiking trails, blue
I'm
trails.
Kathy Ritter. I'm the
care
director of the
about
Colorado
their
Tourism
quality
Office, and
We're also working
I have a particular
advance
interest in
what could
ensuring
be
that our
tens of
state is
millions of
welcoming
dollars
to
in outdoor
travelers of
recreation
all
bonding
kinds. And we have a
through the
separate
upcoming
initiative
special
underway
session.
that we're
I'm
calling
really proud of the
our
partnership
inclusivity and
with, my
diversity.
fellow
I'm sorry, our
panelists,
inclusivity and
to
travel
advance
advisory group
investment in our
that we
national
are currently
parks.
assembling with a
Through
goal
the,
of
Great
developing
American Outdoors
recommendations
Act
for the
that was
Colorado
signed
Tourism
just
Office
last
and the
month,
Colorado Tourism Industry
the
about
country's
how we
investing
can
about
identify
$10 billion
barriers to
over
diverse travel
10
in our
years
state and break those
into
barriers
our
down.
national
So I'm very
parks
happy to be
and
part of this group.
other federal lands.
Great.
We've created
Thank you so much, Kathy.
partnerships at the federal
Rich Chimino.
Thank you, Dan. And that is truly an honor to be with this committee. I'm so glad to meet you all, and I look forward to collaborating with you and working with you all. I grew up in Raton, New Mexico, so I'm not a native, but doggone it, Raton is like 5 miles south of the Colorado border. Most of the Chiminos hail from Trinidad. I'm close enough, but I always, I love New Mexico. New Mexico's okay, but I always thought of New Mexico as like junior varsity, and Colorado is like varsity because the mountains are so much more prominent and other things. So I was able to go to the Air Force Academy. I graduated from the Air Force Academy in 1994, and I was an intelligence officer in the Air Force. I got my bachelor's degree in geography, and I'm so pleased nearly 30 years later, I might actually use my degree on this committee. I was 21 years as an Air Force intelligence officer, retired as lieutenant colonel. And I really recommend the military to anybody, any young kids, out there, any branch. I'm kind of preferred towards the Air Force, but any branch is great. The opportunities are phenomenal. I was able to work with satellites for a lot of years. I was able to work with air personnel on the colonel's group and with the general officers management office. I was able to have the Air Force help me get 2 master's degrees while I was in. And I was even able to be a college professor for 3 years. So I would not have been able to do those things if not within the military environment. I finished at Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs. I retired in 2015. I partnered up with a friend to do a small internet business, and then I was a licensed financial advisor for 3 years. But I ran for county commissioner for Grand County in 2016, and I'm finishing up my first term now. And Grand County is Winter Park, Fraser, Granby, Grand Lake, Hot Sulphur Springs, and Kremling. And love for you all to visit us. Most of you do. I'll tell you, it's been a busy summer and luckily pretty safe. The COVID cases are pretty down. And I've been primarily focusing on healthcare, well, on a lot of issues. County commissioners look at everything, but this is a neat chance to be part of this statewide efforts. And I really look forward to working with, I was county commissioners with Director Gibbs and Deputy Director Tim Mock. And they were a lot of fun serving with as fellow commissioners. And, they're still trying to grow a beard as good as mine, but they have a ways to go. So good luck, guys. I look forward to working with you all. Thank you.
All right. As always, Rich, it's great to see you. And Raton is pretty darn close to Colorado, as you mentioned. So we'll consider you local almost. But thank you. Next up is Catherine Redhorse.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Catherine Redhorse, the Executive Director for the Colorado Commission of Indian Affairs. And actually today is my 1 month start date. I've been in this role for a month now. I'm both honored and excited to be in this role and just serve my community and the tribes that have land bases in Colorado. So again, just super honored to be on this board. I look forward to ensuring that we're including and acknowledging the lands of the indigenous people that have these lands of Colorado now, and how we work with the tribes to ensure that their voice is also included in any decisions and the work that we do as a board. So thank you, and then look forward to working with all of you.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. Next up, William Y.
Hello. Oops. Oh, I am unmuted. And actually, Dan, my name is pronounced Way.
Way, okay.
Yeah, easy to remember. Just remember the, was it the Bing Crosby song, Going My Way. And there won't be any difficulties remembering my last name. I am delighted to be with all of you today, but I guess I should just get on and give you a brief synopsis of my background. My day job is CU history professor. I'm the senior Asian specialist in my department, specializing in modern Chinese history. I have rather diverse intellectual interests that includes also Asian American history and Colorado history and culture. I served as the 2019-2020 Colorado State Historian. I'm a member of the State Historians Council. I'm also the editor-in-chief of the Colorado Encyclopedia, which is an online encyclopedia of the Centennial State. Finally, let me mention that I too am a transplant. I come from the Lower East Side of New York City, which is why I speak with a peculiar accent. I'd be delighted to share stories with you about my various travels from New York across the United States to end up in this glorious state. Thank you.
Dan, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you, William. Next up, we have Patty Limerick. Good to see you, Patty.
Good to see you. Hi, Dan. You've been on the fire lines. Am I right about that?
Yeah.
Haven't.
I'm safe in my office right now, though.
I see that. Rather flame free there. So hi, I'm Patty Limerick. I've been in Colorado for 36 years. I have maybe the most benighted origins because Coloradans are not so happy about California, and I am originally from California, born and raised in California, but forgive me for that, I guess. My mother and father never really checked in with me on that. I have an organization called the Center of the American West at the University of Colorado at Boulder. It is interdisciplinary, but it is based in history, and its slogan is turning hindsight into foresight, which is a lot easier to make a slogan than it is to practice. And by trying to be out as an applied historian, I have had incredible adventures with controversial issues where I feel that participation of the Center of the American West has been able to bring a more reflective, deliberative, temperate form of consideration. Not always, but we did do a long series on fracking. Good heavens, and we survived that. So if we did fracking sense, we can do most anything else. We do have well, personally, my experience began in this whole issue of naming, not geographical, but structural, when I was only been here 2 or 3 years, and I did a inquiry at the Chancellor's request on a building named after a participant at Sand Creek, David Nichols, who was an enthusiastic participant at Sand Creek, proud of his achievements. And we had a building on our campus named after him. It had been named in 1961, long after the events, but I got to do a report on that, and the name was changed to Cheyenne Arapahoe Hall. It was my first round in public controversy, and I was a little bit of a football there for a phase as the debates went on that, but it was very educational. I gained a lot from that. I also did get to play a little bit of a part in the interpretation of the Sand Creek National Monument, so that was good. And now the Center of the American West has a project on very nice, working with the Rocky Mountain National Park people and with the Southern Ute folks, Ute Mountain Ute, Northern Arapaho, Northern Cheyenne, and Southern Cheyenne and Arapaho folks to get a full recognition and presentation to visitors at the park about the prior presence of Indian people and the continued involvement and engagement of Indian people. So we've been doing that for a number of years now, and it's really coming together. So I think much of what we're doing here builds on experiences I have already had some luck in participating in. I do want to say that Rick and I have a tie here because I have had the most wonderful opportunity to be involved with the Student Veterans Organization on campus. And that's just to start really parading my credentials as having some astoundingly excellent young people in my domain. And one of them, who served for 3.5 years in the Army, sorry, not Air Force, and was deployed in Afghanistan and Syria. He is a history major, and he is very eager to be involved in all sorts of engagement of volunteer activity and so on. So there's just humble me sitting here in my humble home. And around me, often appearing on my Zoom screen, are spectacularly talented young people. And Director Gibbs, I would like to say some of those really gifted young people, if they could be of use for this group, for this advisory committee, I could make that happen. So I am brilliant as a talent scout for young people. And so everything I have achieved in that line is available to the whole group. And it's such a pleasure. So many of you I've wanted to meet for a long time. I'm really delighted to have this chance.
Great. Thank you so much, Patty. I really appreciate your willingness to serve in this capacity. Next up, do we have Karen Ann Berry?
Hi. I'm a Colorado native, and I'm the state geologist and director of the Colorado Geological Survey.
You don't get away that easy. Tell us more about your background.
Well, I also served on the Wheat Ridge City Council and was a member of the Denver Regional Council of Governments Board. I've also served on several watershed boards, as well as I'm a member of the Jefferson Conservation District. And on the Wheat Ridge Sustainability Committee.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Karen.
Mm-hmm.
Next up, do we have Luis Benitez? I know that Luis, I think, was going to call in. Maybe he's not on yet, but I think he's going to join us a little bit later. So we'll come back to Luis. Let's see. Terry Nelson. Terry Nelson. Nikki Gonzalez. No. Tim Mock.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. It's an absolute honor to have an opportunity to work with this board, and very excited and looking forward to it. My name's Tim Mock. I'm the Deputy Director for DNR. Have served with Dan for about the last 18 months in this position. Prior to that, I was a county commissioner in Clear Creek County. I live in Idaho Springs and was born and raised here in Southeast Denver. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Tim. Is Rick Garcia here, Executive Director of DOLA?
Yeah, hey Dan, yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Wonderful. Yeah, great. Hi, Rick Garcia. I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Department of Local Affairs, also known as DOLA. DOLA has the authority to support local governments, counties, cities, municipalities, special districts with financial and technical assistance. We've been doing that for a great number of years. My tie to the state is I'm married into a pioneer family that has a pioneer ranch in Huerfano County, the Martinez Ranch down near Gardner. Long history roots of that family being tied to Southern Colorado. It's a privilege and an honor to be involved with such an impressive group of folks. I'm happy to serve on this commission, and I'm here at the pleasure of Governor Polis. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks so much, Rick. I appreciate your participation in this. Okay, also some folks too I want to connect you with is Alice Cosgrove. Alice is my legislative liaison for the Department of Natural Resources. Alice, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Alice Cosgrove, and as Dan said, I'm the legislative liaison for the Department of Natural Resources. So I rep all of the divisions down at the Capitol, work with our sort of legislative proposals, and I know a lot of legislators are really interested in the work that this board is going to do, so I'm excited to be a part. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Alice. Also, we have Chris Aaron, the DNR's Communications Director. Chris, the floor is yours.
Hey, Dan. Hello, everyone. My name is, as Dan mentioned, I'm Chris Aaron. I'm a Communications Director for the Department of Natural Resources. I have been on staff for a little over a year, serving with Dan. Very interesting and engaged department. I'm here to assist you all in any kind of communication needs that you may have or board may have or issues that are presented. We do have a lot of media interest on this board. I think that is indicative of our important mission and important issues that we'll be tackling. So look forward to working with you all.
Great, thank you, Chris. Also, Amy Beatty, the Deputy Attorney General, will be going over a little outline about how we should operate, but I also want to recognize Amy. And Amy, you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure, happy to. I'm Amy Beatty. I'm the Deputy Attorney General for Natural Resources and Environment. That is fancy for. I serve on Attorney General Phil Weiser's leadership team and also oversee the attorneys who work on behalf of Colorado's agencies with environmental and natural resources primary missions. And in that role, I also serve as the counsel to the executive director's office in the Department of Natural Resources. So Dan is one of my primary clients. And if I do my job well for you all, I am here to ensure that you, that people focus on your good work and that the process sort of stays out of the news. My job is to make sure that you all are in compliance with board processes and that things go really smoothly for you so that you guys can focus on making the important decisions that you're here to make. And it's an honor and privilege to work with you all. I'm really excited to do this.
Great. Thank you, Amy. I appreciate your willingness to participate. Also want to recognize someone on your staff I know that will be helping to participate with us. And I appreciate your involvement already, but it's Lindsay Radcliffe. So Lindsay, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks Dan. Hi everyone, my name is Lindsay Radcliffe. I'm a fellow in the Attorney General's office. I just started my new career as a lawyer this past May in the office. I passed the Colorado bar exam and I'm a graduate of University of Denver College of Law. So I'm really excited to be here to support you all and to support Amy. And thanks for having me.
Great, thank you, Lindsay. I previously also mentioned Johnny on my staff and then Dion as well. So I think hopefully we covered everyone. Yeah, thank you, Johnny and Dion for helping to coordinate this meeting. Next, I want to turn it over to Jennifer Runyon for her to introduce herself. But as I mentioned earlier, the vast majority of our work will be working with the U.S. Board of Geographic Names, and we're really lucky to have Jennifer Runyon with us right now. She's research staff for the BGN. Jennifer definitely works extremely hard because she's only one of two staff that work nationally. We were able to meet with Jennifer and some of my staff a couple of weeks ago, and we really had an amazing conversation. So Jennifer, really appreciate your willingness. I know how busy you are to share with us the work that you do because we know the BGN will have a really important relationship with this particular advisory group. So I'd like to turn it over to you to give your background and bio, and then if you could just continue to talk about the National Board of Geographic Names, that would be wonderful. And then about 1:45-ish, we'll see once the governor pops on, and we'll probably, and then he'll provide some remarks. So Jennifer, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everyone. It's really an honor to be here and part of this group. And obviously, I'm not a Colorado native. I confess I've only vacationed there a few times. We actually had a Geographic Names conference there in Boulder in 2006. So it's been a while now, but as Dan said, I had a nice conversation a couple weeks ago with Dan and Tim and some of their colleagues about the BGN and the relationship to what we call our state names authorities and why the input of the state is so valuable to the federal board in the naming process. So I have prepared some slides that we'll go through a little bit later here, I think. As far as my background, I guess, I grew up in England. I would say that because people will say, where's your accent from? It's not quite Virginia, but I've been in Virginia now for 40 years. Came here, my dad was Royal Navy and was posted in Washington, and I never went back. So been in Virginia ever since. Got 38 years of federal service. The first 10 were at Department of Agriculture doing land use surveys. And then I went to NOAA for 2 years as a cartographer, helping with the photogrammetry and the nautical chart production. And then I came over to USGS, the U.S. Geological Survey, which I know is familiar to many Coloradans. We're the agency that produces the topographic maps. And of course, we're the volcano and earthquake people, but we're also the geographic naming people. And so I came over to USGS in 1994, started right away with the Geographic Names Office. So what's that, 26 years now I've been doing this. Yeah, senior researcher, but that just means I'm the older of the two researchers for the BGN. So just comes with seniority, I guess. I'm glad to see at least one other person on this group also has a degree in geography, so got some good company there. And so I really look forward to working with this group, and I know that Dan and even more so Tim will be our primary liaison moving forward. I'm available at any time to participate in any of your meetings, but at the same time, it's a Colorado state function, and so obviously it may not be appropriate for the feds to sit in on, as you get this process rolling and you have your meeting set up. Again, we're available if you'd like us to join, but we certainly don't feel it's required by any means. Obviously, as we conclude this meeting, we'll discuss more of the logistics of how we interact with the state boards whether everything just funnels through, say, Tim or the staff, or whether we communicate with all of you all the time and everybody gets to weigh in. So we'll figure out the logistics and how we interact. And of course, your recommendations that you make as a group will go to the governor. And so we'll talk some more too about how the governor will relay ultimately his recommendation to the federal board. So this will all start to make more sense as we go through some of the slides, which I have, and of course I apologize in advance to Dan and Tim and Johnny. They got to hear a lot of this a couple weeks ago from me, so it's going to be some repetition for them, but for the rest of you, it may be something brand new. So I guess I'm looking at my clock. It looks like we've got about less than 10 minutes before the governor is going to join the call. I don't know whether you want me to start on the slideshow now and we'll just wait till we hear from him and I'll just stop where I am, or should we just discuss a little bit more, just generalities? I don't know how you want to handle this, Dan?
Yeah, Jennifer, how about, I see that Luis just joined us. So let's see if anyone else has joined. And Luis, you could give us a bio, please introduce yourself. And then we can come back to you, Jennifer. So.
Yeah, sincere apologies to everybody on the council and to you, Director Gibbs. I've got a fire drill overseas that we're working with right now. So I'll try to stay on and present for the 3 hours as much as possible. Luis Benitez, it's great to see a bunch of friends here on this council and on the call. Was Governor Hickenlooper's director for the outdoor recreation industry for his second term, and now am the Vice President of Government Affairs and Global Impact for VF Corporation. which is the largest holding company based in outdoor industry, apparel and footwear brands. Way back when, was a Colorado Outward Bound instructor, a mountain guide, and a councilman in Eagle, Colorado, when we lived up there. So happy and honored to be a part of this group. Thanks, Director Gibbs, for an opportunity to say hi.
Great. Thank you so much. We're really glad that you're able to participate. Has anyone else joined us that is a part of the 15-member group? I just want to just double check here. I don't think so. So Jennifer, how about you give us maybe a little overview of the work you do, maybe the structure that's set up, and then let's maybe wait on the slides because we just have just a couple minutes before the governor joins.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. And please, I don't know, raise your hand or interrupt me as soon as the governor joins us so I don't interrupt him. So let's see. Some of this will be on the slides, of course, too, but sort of set the stage, the Board on Geographic Names, and I apologize. I'm glad that Dan already introduced this as the BGN. You'll hear me say BGN or the board or the US board or the federal board. It's all the same thing. We love our acronyms in the federal government. And okay. I see one more. Oh, the board meets monthly, typically in Washington, D.C. at the Department of the Interior. And in fact, the Secretary of the Interior is the conjoint head of the BGN with our executive secretary. They tend to be more hands-off at the department level, but technically every decision we make is with the blessing of the Secretary of the Interior. The board itself is made up of approximately 22 members representing all kinds of agencies that typically have an interest in mapping, geospatial systems, policy. So for example, of course, these are big ones for Colorado, of course, the U.S. Forest Service, we have the National Park Service, Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife Service, the big four. We have Corps of Engineers, we have also the Library of Congress and the Government Publishing Office, even the Postal Service is a member. We have, so within the Department of the Interior, we have the U.S. Geological Survey, and we have BOEM, which is, if I can get it straight, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. Not a lot of that in Colorado, but anyway. And Homeland Security is also a member. I'm sure forgetting, oh, Department of Commerce. So that would be Census Bureau and NOAA, the folks that do the nautical charting. So the idea is that the board meets once a month in DC, and again, up until February, we met in person every month. And of course, now we're meeting virtually. We pride ourselves on the fact we've been able to continue to meet each month virtually by Zoom, and it's going very, very well. We've got great attendance. And the idea basically is for the board to meet and discuss name issues of interest to the federal government. What should the names be on federal maps? But having said that, you know, we're sitting in DC, we don't have that personal connection to the people on the landscape, the landowners, the local governments, indigenous groups, local communities, historical societies, state agencies, even the federal agencies with their own regional and local offices. Much as I would love to spend my time traveling the country and looking at these geographic places and talking to the locals, clearly we can't do that. As Dan mentioned, we have a staff of 2 for the entire nation, so it's a constant challenge to stay on top of all the activities in every state. We have now, with Colorado, we have 49 state names authorities that are active. Only North Dakota is the one that's pretty well on indefinite hold, it seems. So thank you for Colorado for rejoining the group. And even as we're talking, I'm realizing that I didn't really include a slide on the history of the Colorado Names Board, but I'll certainly add that and talk about that at some point, about how we got to where we are here, why are we now just reforming a board, because Colorado has had a very active naming authority for many, many years. So this is not a first time for this board.
Hey, Jennifer, really quick, I'm just curious, how do we compare to some other states? Is it other states have about the same amount of people and diversity from around the state, or how is the structure set up?
Thanks. I like to joke, there's 50 states and 50 ways of doing business. I mean, they're all so different. You're getting up there as far as numbers. I must say, I'm very impressed right from the get-go. You're able to get this many folks interested and involved. This is wonderful. I think Oregon still has the record for something like 22 members. Missouri is up there with 18 or 20. Washington, they're more like 8 or 10 members. Typically, I'm finding that they're 5 or 6 members, typically all state employees. They try and do general cross-reference from the state, a coverage of different agencies, different perspectives. But I must say, from just looking at this group here now, you've got quite a divergent and diverse group. So this is really impressive that you're starting off with this level of input and cross-state coverage. Sometimes I like to hold up South Dakota as the model, because they take their meetings on the road, or at least they did until this year, of course. They actually, whenever there was an issue pending in a particular county, they would take their entire board, all 5 or 6 of them admittedly, but they would take it to the local county courthouse and hold their meeting there on site, which was a wonderful way to get local input, but obviously not very practical for most of us. And then there are many states, it's just one person. It just landed in their lap as other duties as assigned, and it's one person, and they get but maybe one proposal a year to look at. So it's just very much a small part of their jobs. A few, like I say, it's a small committee. Some meet in person. A lot of them just meet by email, or somebody chairs the committee and sends out recommendations, and they all discuss it by email and come up with a united recommendation. Some are under their governors, some are formed by legislation, some come more and more we're seeing under their state GIS council. So they have a regular, maybe a quarterly GIS council meeting, and then for some portion of that meeting, they'll break away and have their Geographic Names board meeting. So really, it runs the gamut of, again, 22 members. Oregon, when they have their meetings twice a year, they make a weekend of it. They travel somewhere, they get together, they stay in a hotel, they have a dinner together, and usually a tour and a speaker. And so they're very, very engaged. And there are a lot of volunteers there too. So they do it at their own expense and time. So really, as we get into this, and I really, really hope that one day we will get back to the point of having these annual Geographic Names conferences where we can meet in person. And as I mentioned, Colorado hosted it back in 2006. So you have a precedent for having had state names authorities come from all over the country to your backyard, so to speak. This year in Portland, Oregon had to be canceled. And unfortunately next year in Missouri has already been canceled too. It's just they don't want to make commitments to hotels and so forth. So it's a pity that we're unable to meet in person. We're all getting pretty good at these Zoom meetings, but nothing beats sitting around a table and, sharing coffee. And we all know that the work gets done in the hallway afterwards when you're chatting, offline. So I hope that answered the question. But yeah, basically 58 states and 49 states and different ways of doing business. They're all a little different.
Jennifer, as I mentioned earlier, the governor will join us here soon. I just want to also recognize Kate Siegel-Shimko. She's the director of the governor's boards and commissions. So she was responsible for making sure you all got appointed properly. Welcome, Kate. Kate, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. And thanks, Dan, so much. And thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate your commitment to our state and to making sure that we have the best names in the nation, I suppose, and the most appropriate names. So thank you for that. And as I said, just your time and your service, we greatly appreciate it. I think we're waiting on the Gov to hop on here in just a few minutes. So I'll let you guys continue your business, but I just really truthfully just wanted to say thank you.
Great, thank you, Kate. We appreciate you joining. Just for a little filler, because the governor will join us really soon. Jennifer, just on average, when a state contemplates a name change, tell me about the average duration of how long that takes. A state may recommend something to the BGN, and then I know you all do your due diligence, of course, but give us a rough estimate of that process and how long that takes on average.
Sure. Well, just like the state boards, every case is a little bit different, it's case by case. We typically tell a proponent, the proponent being the person that submitted the proposal in the first place, we typically tell them 6 to 8 months from start to completion. I will say that most proposals do come to the BGN first. You may find as you get more publicity, more awareness, more outreach in the community, you may find that proponents will approach you rather than come to the US BGN. But I will say that probably out of the 50 states, probably 40, 42, 43 of them, the proposals almost always come to us first. So we do the initial processing and prepare the case brief, and then we send it out to the state for a recommendation, having done the initial review. So the difference really would be is if you as a board are willing and able to accept proposals directly from the original proponent, or will you do as some states do and say, we'd rather not entertain a proposal at the state level first. We would rather you petition the federal board, let the federal board do the initial cut and vetting, and then send it back to the state for review. So that's something we probably want to talk about as a group as to how you would like to be, whether you'd like to be the front line and do a lot of the vetting. I will say that Oregon, Nevada, Washington, there's a couple of other states that are pretty active, and it's because they've had a lot of proposals, they get a lot of media coverage, and they get a lot of visibility, and people know to go to those states first. And those states will do a lot of the initial vetting, the review, and will then send the recommendation on to the BGN almost as a package deal. You've done the outreach, you've done the research, you've prepared the map, whatever it may be, the sketch map. And so by the time it comes to us, there's not much more to be done. It's hard to say. I mean, the staff gets sort of a sense, kind of a gut feeling of how long something's likely to take. We like to say, because we meet once a month, the holdup isn't typically at the federal level. It's really on the frequency of your meetings, how soon we hear back from the county government, how long tribal governments might need to review a matter, if it's on a national forest, if it's fire season. Obviously, we're not going to expect input from the Forest Service anytime soon.
Jen, I apologize. We'll come back to that, but I just want to make sure and give the floor. We have Governor Jared Polis that just joined us now, and Governor, meet your Colorado Geographic Naming Advisory Board.
Well, and we're just so thrilled that each and every one of you has agreed to do this. I want to thank you for bringing your experience, your knowledge, your background, the walk you've walked in life to this process, which is really about, who we are. Who we are is really defined by a sense of place. In the West, we treasure our sense of place. And it's about honoring our history. It's about making sure that we can reflect on who we have been, who we are, and who we aspire to be as a people, while honoring those who came before us in a meaningful way. The U.S. Board of Geographic Names at the U.S. Geological Survey records the official names of geographical places. And for almost a decade now, Colorado has been without the board, which is designed to give the recommendation, which is almost always taken. The national board usually defers to the states. And we wanted to create that state process where people who are rooted in Colorado can on behalf of our residents discuss the role of the place names that have been filed that though some people have wanted to change. Names are important, you know, not only because they signify what something is, but about our values and our legacy of who we are. And with this in mind, you're going to play a critical role in examining the nuances and lenses which place names exist in our state, making sure that places are named after you know, Coloradans. There's some without much tie to our state. There's others that are deeply rooted in our state. We want to value place names that are deeply rooted in our rich Colorado history and really reflect on who we are. Colorado hasn't had one for some time, so we're glad that we've created this board. I want to thank each and every one of you for accepting this very important responsibility. You're from many different parts of our state, many different backgrounds, people who have been here for generations, people who are newer to our state, and that's exactly what we wanted on this board. There's matters pending before the U.S. Board on Geographic Names, and that's the work that you have cut out for you in the coming weeks and months. I really trust that you'll dig in and learn the importance, hear from those who live in and around the places, understand the use of the names, the nicknames or popular names for areas, and really reflect well on our state to make sure that we can continue that powerful sense of place that makes Colorado special. And with your thoughtful attention, we can do that in a way that reflects well on our state, honors our past, reflects the present, and aspires to an even brighter future for which our public lands and named areas are a key intergenerational aspect. Thank you for serving. The recommendations you put forth will really have an influence on how Colorado is understood within and without our borders, the experiences of the next generations of Coloradans growing up here, and those from across the country and across the world who come to recreate in our beautiful wild areas. I wish you the best of luck. I thank you for undertaking this task with the solemnity that it deserves, the dedication that it deserves. I fully trust your work and your deliberations as we embark on a journey, in many ways, a journey core to our identity as Coloradans, a journey for all of us to look with today's and tomorrow's lens on how we want our state to honor the places that we know and reflect the values that we as Coloradans hold dear. Thank you for your work.
Yeah, thank you, Governor. Thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Great. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, some folks are going to be kind of coming in and out of the meeting, and we do have a new arrival, so I want to make sure Nikki Gonzalez has an opportunity to introduce herself and let us know a little bit about yourself, and then we will turn it back over to Jennifer Runyon.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here with you all. I'm Nikki Gonzalez, and I am a history professor at Regis University, where I also serve as Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion. And I'm a member of the State Historians Council and a former student of Patty Limerick. So it's good to see Patty. Hi, Patty. And I'm also a Denver native, so born and raised here in Denver, and my family has very deep roots in mostly southern Colorado. So delighted to be here. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for joining. We appreciate it. Okay, let's turn it back over to Jennifer Runyon. So Jennifer, if you do have some slides and stuff, I'll just turn it over to you, and then once you're done, we will have kind of an open question time frame, and then I'll turn it over to Amy Beatty to kind of go over process on boards and commissions and best practices and so forth of what she will share. So Jennifer, floor is yours again.
Thanks again, Dan. Thank you. And thanks to all of you. And thanks to Governor Polis for the welcoming remarks. It's always great to set the stage like that and inspire us to lots of good, fruitful meetings moving forward. So with that, as I said, I have prepared some slides. It's a PowerPoint, which I'm more than happy to share after the conversation. And I'd like to think that if we were meeting in person, it might be a kind of venue where we could sort of stop and start and discuss slides as we go along and open it for questions and get off on these tangents. But it's kind of hard to do in a Zoom environment. So it's probably best if I just jump in and go through them. It will seem a bit overwhelming at first. There's a lot of slides and a lot of background. And as you can already tell, I can talk pretty fast. So I'll zip through them, especially the beginning where I'm sort of setting the stage on the history of the BGN and kind of who we are. And I've already touched on a few of those, so I'll skip over those and get into the meat of it toward the second half, where we're going to look at, to be honest, each of the 16 proposals that are pending currently in Colorado. It wouldn't typically be that many, of course, but as the governor pointed out, you've not had a state board now for, it's not been quite a decade, but I want to say 2016, I believe, when the last previous state archivist retired. It fell under his office, and then when he retired, it was not picked up by the new archivist. And we wrote to Governor Hickenlooper for some help, and it wasn't really till Governor Polis came into office that there was some genuine interest in reforming this board. And so I'm sure everybody that's read any news articles about anything to do with geographic names, you've got a couple of hot topics right now in Colorado, and there's clearly a reason why this board is needed. And hopefully as I go through the presentation, it'll make sense why, and how we're going to prioritize, if you're going to prioritize which ones to address first, the logistics of tackling a backlog of 16 proposals. And again, I'm more than happy to share the slides. And as I said, I've already realized as I'm making notes here that I should have added something about the history of the Colorado board. I neglected. I so repackaged a previous presentation and customized it for this group. So bear with me. Again, normally I would invite conversation, but let's get through it. And at the end, we can also go back to particular slides if need be. And again, I apologize to Dan and Tim and Johnny who have heard some of this before, but hopefully it'll be a good refresher and it'll give you all an idea of sort of where we're coming from and what we expect from a state names authority. So as I mentioned already to Dion, I'm not the most technically savvy person. I'm good at doing historical research on names, but I'm not very good at running. So I'm going to see if I can do my share screen here and see how it goes. I think once I'm doing that, I'm reading the PowerPoint, I won't see faces. So if you need to just interrupt, I guess just start yelling or put something in the chat and I'll see. And otherwise I'll just keep right on plowing through. Oh, and I guess I should say before I start, the nature of geographic names is obviously we're going to encounter some names that are, let's be honest, offensive, derogatory. I apologize, it's part of the job. We're going to use some words. Unfortunately, you're going to hear some words, see some words on maps that are going to, be offensive or maybe sensitive to certain audiences. And so when you're in this business long enough, you do start saying some of these names and it's uncomfortable, but it's part of the job. So I apologize in advance if I use some examples that, again, are not going to be, but that's what we're here for, right? Is to discuss these names and hopefully get them off the landscape because they've been there a long time and this is what we're here for. So again, just apologies in advance. So with that, let's see how it goes. Oh, let's start off with it. Here we are. All right. Is anybody seeing my screen?
Perfect.
Oh, good. Okay. Wow. All right. You can see the full screen, hopefully. All right. Oh, I see where it says stop share at the top. So thank you, Dion. That'll when I get to the end. All right. So obviously that's me, Jennifer Runyon, senior researcher for the Board on Geographic Names, the BGN. Again, thank you all for being here. Let's see if this works. Let's do the go to the next one over here. Okay, there we go. Yes, good. Okay. Just see the next screen now. We have the history. Okay. All right. So the BGN was established in 1890 by President Benjamin Harrison, and then reestablished by by public law in 1947. we like to say that Congress created the board to deal with geographic names so that they wouldn't have to worry about it. Obviously, Congress and the president are the only authorities, should we say, higher than the BGN when it comes to naming. So if Congress or the president does, in fact, pass legislation or introduce an executive order, they would have an authority over the BGN, but otherwise we have essentially the final word for federal usage of all place names. And the reason the BGN was established in 1890 was, you think back to, this is the era of westward expansion, exploration, surveying. It was pretty obvious in the early days, and USGS had been formed, 10 years earlier. Topographic mapping was really well underway at that point, and surveyors were coming back to Washington with their reports and their sketch maps and their descriptions of local geography and history, and filing them with the federal offices in Washington and making the maps. And then, a decade later, another group would go out and come back with its reports and its different place names. And so the president realized that it was necessary to form a board that would standardize place names for the federal government. Just like you've done here today, he found a good dozen members willing to serve on the federal board. Some big names in history and geography at the time sat on this board, and they would meet once a month and discuss names and decide what was going to be the one official name for federal use. And that's something we'll keep coming back to, is one official name. One name, one feature. You can have numerous variant names, but only one official name. So again, the president formed this board to standardize names for federal use, to avoid this confusion that was clearly going on. And I love this photograph. This is from 1913. This is the board meeting at the Forest Service building in Washington, D.C. And to be perfectly honest, if you look at one of our meetings today, with the exception of no long white beards, and fortunately a few females now and a few non-white people, should we say, it hasn't changed much. We still sit around a table and look at maps and reports, and can't say we're all wearing suits and ties, but otherwise that's the BGN in 1913 and still going strong. So our mission statement, of course, I mentioned executive order and the public law, is again to provide uniformity in geographic nomenclature, fancy word for names, and orthography, that's language, throughout the federal government. To develop principles, policies, and procedures, which you'll hear a lot about too, with regard to both domestic and foreign names. And the Secretary of the Interior, as I mentioned earlier, actually is the conjoint head of the BGN and will promulgate decisions with respect to geographic names and principles. There's actually two standing committees on the BGN. We have the Domestic Names Committee, which is my group and the ones you'll deal with, but we also have a Foreign Names Committee, deals with names for all the rest of the world. Obviously, they're not going to vote on names for foreign countries, but they record them for federal maps. So if the State Department is doing a report, or CIA, whoever needs foreign names, they also have quarterly meetings and members, and they discuss foreign names issues. Quite interesting, a very different approach, but still fascinating. And we have advisory committees. We're responsible also for the names in Antarctica. That comes under our office, domestic names, because historically USGS did the mapping of Antarctica, so we have Antarctic names responsibility. And then the Foreign Names Committee oversees the Undersea Features Committee. So yes, the BGN even names trenches and valleys on the bottom of the ocean floor. So we have literally international coverage. We have additional subcommittees and special committees that address everything from, again, executive committee, which is the bylaws and basically the running of the board. Communication, outreach and website and FAQs and so forth. We have a policy on tribal geographic names and communication. So I'll touch on that a bit later. We currently have 11 departments comprising 21 different federal agencies, or I shouldn't say different, because there are multiple members from some agencies, but 21 agencies that sit on the board within the 11 departments. And again, we serve as the federal authority for all geographic names issues. We respond to inquiries. And obviously what we're doing here now is entertain proposals for new names and name changes. This is the breakdown of the actual members of the agencies, the different departments. So I've mentioned already the land management agencies. I won't dwell too much on this one. Obviously the ones you would expect involved with mapping and so forth. Foreign names, in case you ever really care, the CIA, and some of them will serve on both domestic and foreign names, but most the State Department and CIA don't get involved with domestic names yet, anyway. The importance of standards, this is just to emphasize the fact that we standardize geographic names. We don't regulate, which is kind of hard to differentiate between the two, but the idea is that we want to have one name for one feature used by all federal agencies to refer to that one feature. We are not going to regulate the spelling of a name. So you could have two different features in two different locations spelled differently for the same person, perhaps. Maybe a name was spelled differently, or especially an indigenous name or a local name could be spelled differently. So we're not going to tell you that every occurrence of a word around the country has to be spelled the same. We only ask that if you refer to one particular feature, that it be the same name throughout government. And it's probably worth stating that, of course, we make decisions for the federal government. Nothing we do is binding to the state government or local governments. You don't have to follow our decisions. You don't have to use the names that we approve. But by virtue of having this dialogue here, it makes sense that we all use the same name with at various levels of government. Search and rescue, you can't imagine, the confusion would be. I mean, Dan's been out in the field fighting fires. I mean, if you had different names on a state map versus a federal map, that would cause all kinds of confusion in search and rescue and emergency preparedness and land management. So we encourage states and counties and all other folks to use the same name for the same place. But again, federal names are not binding to the state, nor are your decisions binding to the federal government. We don't have to accept your decisions or recommendations. We can do our own thing, and it will occasionally happen where the federal board will make a decision that differs from the state recommendation. Hopefully it's very rare, but we work together to get to the point where we all agree, hopefully. So again, the importance of standards is your standard, blurb builds fundamental building blocks for product development. And this is a nice statement here. So the Domestic Names Committee, and you may hear us talk about the DNC, another one of our acronyms. Again, we've already sort of touched on this. Consider proposals for new names and also name, spelling, or location changes. So the name itself might need to be changed entirely to something different. The spelling might just be slightly wrong. We need to address the spelling, or the location could be wrong. The name is perfectly fine, but we have it on the wrong peak or the wrong river or the wrong valley. Someone comes to us, I've lived here all my life, and that's not what I call the place. It should be on that peak instead. So it's just a matter of moving the name elsewhere. So there's a location change. We're very much a reactive body. So we receive proposals. We don't initiate proposals. We receive them from the general public, a local organization, and then a local government, state governments. Anybody can submit a proposal, federal agency, tribal government can submit a proposal to the BGN. We have an online and a hard copy application form, which we can probably demo later, future meeting maybe, where it's all on our website. So once we get a new proposal, assuming it comes to us first, we prepare a case brief. We add it to the quarterly review list, which is basically at the end of each quarter. We summarize all the new proposals we've received in that last 3 months. Typically anywhere from 20 to 40, sometimes more proposals have come in that quarter. We add them to this quarterly review list. And that would be a great way for you all, if you haven't had a chance yet. I think there were some links in Johnny's email about the various URLs, but if not, when you get a chance, this kind of really does set the stage for you as far as the kinds of proposals we deal with, the kinds of issues. Some are very straightforward and the write-up is a short paragraph. Others are very complex, and we have pages and pages of description on the issues. So it's our way as staff to summarize the issue, the background research we've already conducted, basically who said what so far. And so it's a great way to sort of set the stage as to what we're dealing with. So you will rely on that quite a bit. And when we send you a proposal, it'll refer to the quarterly review list number. So something else we want to talk about later is how we're going to manage the back and forth, the workload, the individual cases, how we're going to process them. But we'll talk about that later. And as I mentioned, we're sitting in DC and we really don't have the luxury of going out to the local community. That's where we rely on the local government to speak for its citizens. They're elected to speak for the people of the county. State names authority. That's you all, your input is valuable. State or federal land management agencies. So again, if it's on the National Forest, consult the Forest Service. Park Service, same thing. BLM is in a refuge, Fish and Wildlife Service, so forth. And if it's a state agency or state managed land, we trust that you all will do the state agency outreach. So if DNR manages an area, a park or an area, then not only will you recommend through this board your opinion, but you'll also hopefully seek the input of the local park manager, the DNR land manager on the ground. They're the ones familiar with these features more than anybody else. They know the local opinions. So as part of your job, you will, as state agencies, reach out to your own state counterparts to formulate your decisions. We'll talk a bit later about tribal outreach, and then any other interested party, historical societies, other groups that might have an interest should always be included whenever possible. And that's why I'm glad to have, for example, History Colorado involved and some of the other groups on this call today that will present the historical perspective. You hear us talk a lot about this PPP, Principles, Policies, and Procedures. That's kind of our Bible, so to speak, and there's a link there. I think that was also in Johnny's email. It's about a 40-page document, but it goes over all the policies. A lot of what I've said here today comes right from that PPP guidance document. It was last updated and approved by the Secretary of the Interior in 2016. The first edition came out in the 90s. Before that, a lot of what we did was sort of just common knowledge or written notebooks, but this was the first time it was really formalized. It was in the 90s. No, sorry, it was 87, and then it was again in 97. So this one really was brought into the 21st century, and it really did add a lot more information on tribal involvement. So that was the biggest change for 2016. I've already mentioned we meet monthly in DC at Department of the Interior. Now we're meeting virtually. I mentioned each state has a names authority right now, except for North Dakota. It was great to be able to update the slide. Last time I gave this presentation a month ago, I had Colorado and North Dakota currently inactive. So it was great to be able to remove Colorado from this slide. And again, this is our basic mantra, present day, local use and acceptance. Yes, historical input is wonderful, but really what do people want the name to be today? So what's the local present day acceptance? So let's see, plowing along. So once we've done all our outreach and we've gotten feedback from everybody, the state and the county and the tribes and so forth, we put the name on the monthly docket for the discussion at the meeting, and the board makes the final decision. If the name is approved, it goes into our database, and I got a few slides on that, so we'll just breeze through that here. Obviously, new names and name changes will be applied to the next USGS topographic maps. If it's a water feature, we update it in the National Hydrography data set and other federal products. So if it's in a national forest, obviously the Forest Service will update its visitor maps, Park Service, its brochures, and so forth. We notify all parties of the decision. I will say that we process about 250 proposals per year. So there's typically about a dozen on each monthly docket. It sort of depends on what's ready for a vote. We like to joke that in the course of the meeting, the board votes on, again, 12, maybe 15 names. By the time we meet next month, another 12 new proposals have come in the door. So it's this constant rolling processing of proposals in various stages of review. various stages of response from interested parties. We're constantly juggling the list and seeing what's ready for a vote. If it's not ready, it gets deferred another month, and we bring it up hopefully the next time. But again, a lot depends on how long it takes to hear back, and that was what Dan touched on. You know, how long is the process, or it was Tim? How long is the process? That's why I said, you know, 6 or 8 months. It can be up to a year, sometimes more. Each case is very much case by case. There's no real hard and fast rule. There's no deadlines per se. The only deadline that might occur is if, say, the Forest Service is producing a new visitor map, and they'd love to be able to have the new name on the map before it goes to press. There's some kind of underlying sort of pressure to get a decision made. Or, to be honest, if it's a very high profile case, there's pressure to get a name approved or a name changed. But at the same time, the more controversial, the more high profile, the more parties involved, the longer it's going to take. And I'm going to obviously touch on our favorite, Mount Evans, but that's already been pending for a couple of years. So, you know, it's also not going to happen as I think it was Redhorse said earlier, it's not going to happen overnight. Or maybe it was Limerick said it won't happen overnight. So this is just a snapshot or a screenshot of our website. Obviously, there's a lot to see here and it's hard to read, but if you get a chance, take a look at our website. And I noticed already that you guys have set up a Colorado State Board website, which models some of this text. That's wonderful. And you'll see that it's probably a dozen or 15 states that also have websites. Not all do, especially when it's just one person. There's a lot of information out there on what your counterparts are doing in other states. That would come under names organizations there on the left. But this just is kind of our home page. Look at that later if you can. So we're getting into the principles. These are kind of the biggies. These are the big things that the board abides by. We have policies which fall within these principles, but these are the big ones. Some sort of obvious things like using the Roman alphabet in geographic names. Now there will be exceptions. Talk about tribal, indigenous names, but for the most part, the names will be in the Roman alphabet. Principle 2 just says we will recognize the names in local use. What do the local people want to call a place? How do we get to the point where we know what that is? So, you know, local usage is very important. I touched on briefly the fact that if a name is established by an act of Congress or by executive order, those will supersede anything our board and your board might do. So if someone does go right to Congress and Congress passes a bill to name a feature, we just accept it as official and there's no vote. It's just, that's it. They have authority over us. Principle 4, names established by other authorities. This is a little more complex. One thing I've not really touched on at all yet, and this is something that you all are going to have to probably address at the state level, is our decisions are only for natural features. So you're going to see when we get into the list of pending cases, we're talking about mountains and rivers and lakes and valleys. We don't vote on what we call administrative features, which you might call man-made or cultural features. The BGN is not going to dictate what a local school is going to be called, or a church, or even a park, or even a dam. Yes, we'll vote on the reservoir name, but not the dam name. That's a man-made entity. There's only one state that I can think of, Arizona, that does have the authority to also vote on their highways and parks and trails and so forth, man-made entities. But even though we do record these in our database, we do not vote on them. We simply accept the name that the local school authority names that school. So that's something that you may need to talk about, because you're going to find a lot of these, especially these offensive names, could apply to schools or parks. And do you have the authority? Do you want to be involved with decisions on those kinds of features? Again, as far as I know, Arizona is the only one where it's part of their mandate. All the other states are like us. They don't vote on man-made entities. So that's probably going to be your very first order of business, is decide what is your purview. Do you want to offer guidance to the school board if they come to you with help on renaming a school, or again, a park? And you know, DNR, you got a lot of parks, and you may well have a name of a park that somebody now claims is offensive. How do you want to handle those? You may have your own internal naming guidelines within your agency. So again, think about whether you want to take on man-made features. My instinct tells me that you've got enough to deal with right now with natural features, so maybe start with those. But you know, again, just talking about Mount Evans, there's Mount Evans Campground, there's Mount Evans Trail, there is other features that are very much tied to that natural feature that you're going to be looking at. Now, those are Forest Service facilities, and they presumably will address those names as the name of the mountain is being addressed. So that wouldn't really be state business, but there are going to be some that are on state land or private land that would conceivably come under your jurisdiction if you so chose. I already mentioned one name for one feature. And then Principle 6, actually this was added in the new PPP revision, was preservation of names and features. Basically, what that means is that once a feature is named, it can never be unnamed. So you may not like the name it has currently, but you can't just unname it. You have to change it to something else. And to be honest, it's really the only way the old name is going to disappear is if you replace it with something different. So unlike Canada, which will allow their provinces and territories to unname a feature, and it can stay unnamed until a better name comes along, our policy has always been that in order to get rid of an offensive name or to change a name or correct a spelling, you have to submit a proposed replacement. So you go from one to the other essentially immediately in a decision. You don't unname a feature, which may seem like some people the easy way out is just to remove the name and leave it unnamed again. That's not allowable. All right, so these are the policies. There's a lot of them here, and I don't want to spend too much more time on all of this, but they're pretty self-explanatory. You'll see things like we have policies that address, again, names approved by Congress or the president. We have a policy that addresses name changes. Again, you have to have a reason to change a name. We're going to err on the side of leaving a name well enough alone unless there's a compelling need to change it. And again, you have to come in with a replacement. Commemorative names. You can't name a natural feature for a living person. The intended honoree must have been deceased at least 5 years. So you're going to get some requests to name things for a family member or someone who's living. But no, it has to be deceased 5 years. We have a wilderness names policy, which is very important. In Colorado, you've got a lot of land, federal land, that's wilderness designation. Basically, the board will not approve any new name in a designated wilderness area or a wilderness study area unless the proponent can provide a compelling reason why that feature needs a name. The idea is to leave wilderness untrammeled, untouched by humankind. The sense of the first time you're out there in that wilderness, that you're the first person to ever encounter that particular lake or that feature, and your map is not littered with names. Just like with wilderness, you can't take your ATV out there, and you can't necessarily go camping without permission. Wilderness is supposed to be left pristine, and that includes not applying geographic names. So we'll get into a lot of those, I'm sure, as Colorado board gets really ongoing. And it's not the case for name changes. That is not a policy because it already has a name. So replacing the name with something else is not a violation of the policy. So name changes are allowed in wilderness areas. That's only for new names. Obviously, derogatory and offensive names we're going to touch on a little bit later. Diacritics, we now allow writing marks. Many indigenous languages include now writing marks to help in pronunciation. Those are now permitted. Duplicate names, obviously you don't want to approve a name that's going to duplicate another name in close proximity. Again, the search and rescue. Hey, I'm drowning in Bear Lake, and you've got 3 Bear Lakes within a 10-mile radius. Which one is it? So we want to avoid duplicate names. But at the same time, there may already be duplicate names in an area, and somebody may propose a change for one of them to avoid the confusion that's been ongoing. So if someone says we've got 3 mud lakes and we need to rename one of them, that will be removing a duplicate name. Variant name is anything other than the one official name. We have tried to avoid overly long names, and that's just kind of, you sort of know, if it's for a person, you really only want their surname or maybe their nickname, not their full first name, last name, title, middle name. Just go with their surname. Otherwise, you'd have Zebulon Pikes Peak, or you'd have, you know, Henry Hudson Bay. No, it's just Pikes Peak. Don't have the full name. There's a whole policy on tribal names, which we'll touch on later. The last two are new. Commercial names is really discouraging names that clearly promote a product or a business. The idea that you don't want to name something that's going to promote sales of a particular product or business. So we're seeing a lot of those, well, not a lot, but a fair number of commercial names, and the board really discourages those. And then finally, we had to do a policy on animal names. You'd be surprised how many requests we get. Someone wants to name something for their recently deceased dog. We do have a policy on that. So if it comes up, we'll talk about that another time. This is from our website, some things you might want to look at. If you ever go to meetings or a handout, we've got some trifold brochures, everything from basically an overview of what we do here, introduction, some resources. We have one that Setting the Facts Straight, which is kind of a useful document. It explains some of the misstatements that are out there about our board, things that we need to set straight. Our bylaws and a copy of that 1947 public law. Those are all on the website. Some of you may already be familiar with the Geographic Names Information System, the GNIS. This is our database. Obviously, when a name is approved or to be changed, we need to put it somewhere. So we've been developing this database for well over 40 years. Way back, it was just, you know, paper printed gazetteers, and then we developed a digital database. It's searchable. It contains all the decisions of the BGN back to day one, 1890. As of today, it has 2.2 million names listed, or features, I should say, listed in the database. Every feature is referenced by a unique feature ID, so that will never change. The name might change, of course, but the ID itself refers to that feature, so it never changes. That's the way to keep track of a change, by keeping the feature ID consistent. Database used by all different levels of government and the public. Even genealogists love to search for historical towns and cemeteries and churches and schools and whatnot. It's the base layer for federal products, the USGS national map, the USGS topographic maps, of course, all other federal products, maps, and we also record historical and variant names. So historical names are features that no longer exist. This is where we differ from a modern day GIS or cartographic database. We are a gazetteer, which is really a fancy word for a geographic dictionary. So you have a lot of small communities in Colorado that are long gone. But if they were shown on a 1925 topographic map and it's now a ghost town, we would not delete it from the database. We would simply mark it historical. And if we know when it ceased to exist, we would put that. You might also have a town that was inundated by a new reservoir. We would keep it in the database, but mark it historical. So again, this is why this is a great resource for historians and genealogists and folks interested in the past. It's not just a present day list of names. And again, variant names is anything other than the one official name. So we capture those from all kinds of sources. So what is a geographic feature? Basically anything on the landscape that requires identification. If it has a name, it should be in GNIS. So obviously you've got, you know, Denver and Mount Elbert and South Platte River and high school. But if it's simply labeled tower or well with no name, no, it would not go in the database. It has to have an official formal name. There is a caveat there at the bottom though. We are in the process of removing all of these cultural man-made features in the next year or so. To be honest, it's a maintenance nightmare to keep up with new schools and parks and whatnot. And there are other USGS programs that will take over that responsibility. So while I mentioned right now there's 2.2 million names in GNIS, a year from now there likely will be half that many. So that's another discussion for another day, I think. So this is just a background on the collection of names over 40 years, starting in the 70s, USGS maps, and Forest Service maps, and then we started collecting names from all kinds of other published sources and the state and local maps. We're still adding names even now. If you come across a name that's not in a database, we can add it. And you may encounter some names in your research that you can submit to us to be included. not every name has to go to the BGN for approval. If there's no conflict, if there's no existing name, there's no, it doesn't violate any policies, it's on a published source, a county map, a state map, we can just put it right in the database, no discussion, no formal approval. So it's probably worth noting that probably a tiny percentage of names in the database have ever been formally approved by the BGN. Most names just collected from all these different sources. We don't collect roads and highways at all. Again, as I mentioned, we'll be removing the cultural features here before too much longer. So this is just a screenshot of our database that you can query, and you can search by name, state, and county, and you can look at that at your leisure. The URL at the bottom there. Once you do a search, for example, this is what Mount Evans, anything you search for Mount Evans in the database, you'll get these, what, half a dozen different entries. The second one there, obviously Mount Evans, the summit, and it's got the name of the county and obviously the state in Colorado, the location, the name of the topographic map, the date that the name was initially entered into the database. But you've also got, as I mentioned earlier, you've got everything from the Mount Evans Wilderness. You've got actually 2 summits in Colorado called Mount Evans. We tend to forget the second one over in Lake County, but that was also named for Governor Evans. So no one's proposed a change for that one yet, but it may well come. So this is what a detailed report looks like. It's just a little more detail on the name and the location. And if there's some background correspondence, you can click there and read some of the background. It has the county, and this actually is the one in Park and Lake County. This is the other Mount Evans. Once you get the database, you can click on various map services, so you can view the location on a topographic map or on a Esri base map. We love our maps, of course. There's a more advanced query page. In this case, you want to look for maybe all the streams in Douglas County. So you just select the state and the county and the feature type. Hit send query, and it'll give you all the named streams in Douglas County. In this case, there's 57 of them. You can see 15 at a time, or view the entire list down at the bottom. This is a whole nother presentation, I think, is if you really care about the database itself. Again, another detailed report of what a name would look like in the record. As I mentioned, I work for USGS in Reston, Virginia. It's USGS headquarters. We have mapping centers in Rolla, and technically that should be Lakewood, not Denver. As you probably know, the federal center there, they have the USGS has a facility. We have huge warehouse full of historical field notes, case files back to 1890. We're in the process of scanning them, making them online, putting them online. Most of them are attached now to the GNIS record, but this will be very valuable for you all, I think, when you're starting to research the history of some of these names that need to be changed. Is you need to know, when was the name applied? Who initially used it? What maps has it appeared on? Was it a former decision? Was his name formally approved in the 20s? Is there a 1920s case file? So I hope you can call on us to check these historical records if you need to. And obviously we can help with research. And we get inquiries just from the public, when was something named? Or, how did it get a name? And this is what those historical work cards look like. They're attached to the record. They're a pretty neat resource. Again, this is another one. This is more of a decision file. This is what an earlier one looked like that staff would have prepared, and before we were all online, of course, but an old paper file, we still have these. So what are you? You're a state names authority, a legislated or informally established board or committee, having responsibility for reviewing geographic name proposals, whether directly by the proponent or by the BGN. So again, you can decide if you want to accept proposals right from the public or whomever, or if you'd rather they all come through us first. You'll have to decide that later. In the course of your research, you will solicit input from state agencies, hopefully local governments. If you don't, we will. It's up to you. The general public, and ultimately provide a recommendation on behalf of the state to the BGN. You are automatically, a state board now, a member of the Council of Geographic Names Authorities, the acronym COGNA. And I mentioned we've had annual conferences, and Boulder back in 2006, hopefully it will happen again in a year or two. We can get back together again. Okay, so with all that, I don't know how are we doing for time anyway? It's 4:30 here. Was that 2:30? Dan, how are we doing for time? Is it
Jennifer, what how many more slides do you have?
I have about 15 more, but each one of them is basically each one of the 16 names that are pending in Colorado, which, you know, obviously I don't want to get into all the background of each one. I just want to kind of skip through them really quickly. So I would say maybe 20 more minutes. So is it the time for a stretch, or should we keep going?
Let's, I can't see everyone's face, but give me a thumbs up if you all need a break right now, or should we just kind of plow through? What's the sense of everyone? Or just speak up too.
And Tim here. Yeah, I'd say if we've got 20 minutes left, we can take a break then. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Let's keep it going. I hear from William too. So yeah,
okay?
keep it rolling. That sounds good.
All right. Okay. Well, I appreciate you all hanging in there. I know it's a lot, and I'm not, as you say, I'm not seeing faces. Hopefully everyone's still awake. I know it's you never have to hear this again. This is all just setting the stage and hopefully giving you an idea of who we are and what we do and why. So you've heard that, you know, one of the primary reasons for reforming this board is because we have a list now of 16 pending proposals in Colorado. Some going back almost to the time when the previous board ceased to operate. I think the oldest one now is 2017, I think it came in. So we're looking at close to 3 years that a couple of these have been pending. The list here on the screen is more or less in chronological order in which we receive them. And you can see already that there's some duplication here as far as the current names. So it doesn't mean there are 16 separate individual features. In some cases, we have multiple proposals or at least more than one proposal for a particular geographic feature. So what I've tried to do here is simply put together just a slide, you know, with a map and a heading for each one of these. I've already shared with Tim, and I think Dan probably has a copy too. It's a spreadsheet I put together that lists these names, the proposed name, the current name, and the state, well, the county, the location, who we've heard from. So that'll be sort of your marching orders, I guess, at some point, as you will start to work through this spreadsheet or this list and see what is pending, which ones might be ready for a vote sooner rather than later. I know we all hate the expression low-hanging fruit, but the idea is that, you know, maybe one or two on this list that are basically ready for you all to vote on. Everything's been done. You know, the local government's responded. There's no controversy. So how you want to organize this list, whether you want oldest to newest, easiest to hardest, that's up to you all to decide. But with that, I'll just get through pretty quickly here.
Could I ask a quick question about that list?
Of course.
This is Adrian Benavides. And before you said if these proposals went to you first, that you would do a write-up with the background information. So besides a list, do you have the write-ups on all of these that would be provided to us?
Yes, in the spreadsheet that I sent to Dan or to Tim, there's also a packet of information that we prepared for each one of these, which I presume that he can share with all of you to set the stage. It has a copy of the original proposal. It has the staff's case brief, the write-up we did, a map, and then copies of any input we've received so far. You know, if there's a response from the county, it'll be in there. So Tim, you got that, right? I think the email I sent, I think I sent it to you.
I believe so. I don't recall all of the background information, but I can go back and check.
Okay, I think I sent it maybe 2 weeks ago. If you don't have it, I'll go back and check. But yes, yes, Adrian, certainly there's a lot of background to be shared as you get in. I'm presuming there'll be no decisions today. So at some point before your first meeting or your next meeting, you'll get copies of the background and look through it and get a real sense of what the issue is.
Right. Thank you.
And that's, I'll just add, and that's a real value of having folks submit potentially, right to the BGN, where Jennifer and her staff can do some research and then send us, what they have, and then we can do our own research on our end too. So
Right. Yeah, my thought probably is it might be probably is premature for you all to be willing to accept proposals right as you're new and getting started. You got enough to work on here. I would suggest that if you get an inquiry, now that you have a website and a presence, and if there's media coverage tomorrow morning about this meeting and people start contacting you, I would say for the near term, send them to us. And then as time goes on, when you clear through the backlog, then maybe you'll be open to entertaining proposals directly. But yeah, we're happy to process them at our end from here on out.
Jennifer, question. Yes. Oh, this is William Way. I have a question. The package of information that you will be providing will also explain the rationale for the proposed name change, yes?
That's correct, yes. That's pretty much the first question we ask anyone is, why are you changing the name? And that'll be in the write-up, and it'll say exactly, what the proponent's argument is, why should this name be changed? So yes, that'll all be in there. So
yes, I can understand why they would want to change the name, but they will have information regarding the proposed.
Oh, right. Yes. That's
okay.
It's sort of implied somewhat in the proposal, but yes, if they don't explain the choice of name, the first thing we'll do is go back and say, well, what is the meaning of this name? Why have you chosen this name? Why is it the best replacement?
Very good, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. All right, moving on then. So the first one, again, I'll try and go through these. You can read these much later at your leisure. Squaw Mountain in Clear Creek County changed to Mount Mastanta. I won't belabor, why these names need to be changed. I think most of you will figure that out on your own. One of the twists on this one, I guess, is that we did get a response back through the Forest Service tribal liaison from the Northern Cheyenne tribe, and they suggest that the name should be spelled, as you'll see there in the lower left of the slide. We've not gotten a formal proposal for that name. And this is an issue where someone can suggest a name, but if they don't propose it, even if it's just an email saying, I propose this name, it's not a valid proposal yet. So that's going to be one we're going to have to wrangle with right from the start. It's the same honoree, but it's a question of how her name should be spelled. Is it the anglicized version, or is it the traditional Cheyenne spelling? And you'll see there it's got a couple of writing marks or diacritics in it. So, and doesn't say mountain either. So what are they suggesting? So we'll work on that one. The county has said no on this one. Oh, I'm sorry, William?
Oh no, I was going to ask you about the county saying no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to put Tim on the
name.
We can put Tim on the spot.
Yeah, or was it the spelling?
Well, the original statement from the county, and this was a good couple of years ago now, was basically there was no compelling need to change the name and the costs involved in changing signs and maps and so forth. But I will say we've talked more recently with the Clear Creek County Commissioner, and they are meeting in just a couple, maybe even next week, I think it is, and they very likely will revisit the issue. And my understanding is they probably will withdraw their objection to the change. So then it becomes, yes, what should the replacement name be? So again, I don't want to put Tim on the spot, but Tim was on the Clear Creek County Commission when that decision was made. So he can explain that to you much later at his leisure, I guess. But it's definitely an ongoing issue for sure. And waiting for the Forest Service too.
Jennifer, this is Adrian again. Could I ask another question with regard to any proposals? They were proposed by whoever individual or group that submitted the proposal, but as we evaluate, do we have to only consider what was proposed? Or let's say, and we don't have procedures yet for this board, but if we had meetings and had public comments that suggested other names, are we open to considering those, or does that have to start a new process or a new submission?
The answer is sort of yes and yes, in that the US BGN can only consider the name that's on that monthly docket for a decision, but how we get to that point, you're absolutely right. There could be, in the interim, there could be counter proposals or new suggestions, or you may reach out to the county and come up, or the local population or the tribal government. And yes, there may well be another name that's put forth. So yes, the Colorado board could indeed be a proponent itself. You all are welcome to submit another name instead. You can say, we agree that Squaw Mountain should be changed, but we don't support this particular replacement. We propose something different. Now that would become a new proposal. So yes, it would require a new case brief on our part. It would require a new posting on the next quarterly review list. We would then go back out to all parties for follow-up again. Now, if you've already contacted the county and gotten their support for your name, you've done that part, but we need to give the tribes time to review the new name, for example, or the Forest Service, whoever it may be. So that's another reason why these things take potentially longer. But to answer your question, certainly we encourage the state and your partners, and with so many of you on this board, with so many different connections throughout the state, you invariably are going to find, quote, a better name. So by all means, yes, you can be the proponent, and we will process it as a new proposal as if anybody else, or you can encourage somebody else to submit a new proposal to the BGN, and that would set us back to the beginning again. So only the original proponent can withdraw their proposal. I have actually talked to the proponent of Mount Mastanta, and she has already told us that if in fact that Cheyenne name is formally proposed to us, she will withdraw Mount Mastanta, but only she can do that. You can vote to reject it, but only the proponent can withdraw that from consideration. And that very well might happen here. But there are times, yes, where the BGN is asked to vote on multiple proposals for the same feature. We don't like to be in that situation. We would much prefer that be resolved at the local or state level. We would like you all to work through the list of proposals or counter proposals and come up with one that all the people of Colorado agree to. Now, that's probably optimistic to put it that way, but ideally we want to have one name on our final monthly docket for the vote. But there are times where we have to be the decision maker between more than one proposal. And that's, especially if it's multiple indigenous names, those are difficult. We prefer not to have to choose. But yeah, this is something we'll kind of work through each of these, and again, how your board, whether you want to become proponents from time to time and propose something different, or encourage others to submit proposals as individuals, and you just tell them where to go to fill out the form. That's really up to you. But yeah, it's going to be case by case. Obviously, our hot topic these days, I guess, of course, Mount Evans. We got 3 proposals pending right now to change that name. The first one that came in, Mount Cheyenne Arapaho, submitted, you probably have seen the news coverage, I guess a school teacher in Denver. Then we got Mount Soul for Silas Soul, and apparently I guess there's a statue to Silas Soul in Denver, and he was one of the few who really, that young Captain Silas Soul, really protested or fought against the Sand Creek massacre that was going on, and he did his best to counter the attack. Of course, he was a small cavalry, and they unfortunately didn't have much success, but he was viewed as a hero at the time. So this one proponent decides that Silas Soul should be the honoree to replace the name for Mount Evans. And then just in the last month or so, we got the 3rd proposal for Mount Rosalie, which was the name of the mountain before it became Mount Evans. Back in the 1890s, it was changed from Mount Rosalie to Mount Evans. The issue, of course, is that when that happened, they put Rosalie's name on another peak nearby. So you have Rosalie Peak nearby. So could you have Mount Rosalie and Rosalie Peak in close proximity? Wouldn't that cause more confusion? So that sort of implies that if Mount Rosalie were to be accepted, Rosalie Peak probably ought to be renamed too. So something to think about. I think we almost need a whole meeting dedicated just to Mount Evans. So there's another one where the county said no, but is going to revisit it next week. So take that no with a huge grain of salt. So again, I think we'll need to come back to that one and when we have more time. I don't want to gloss over it, but it's a meeting in itself. This one's straightforward for the most part. Is the Eagle County to rename benchmark lake to Nottingham Lake. The issue in this one, unfortunately, is there's another Nottingham Reservoir just a very short distance away. So you'd have two Nottingham Lake / reservoir close by. The town is okay with the change. County says they have no opinion. So that might be an easy one, but it might not be. It's hard to say. We have two Redskin names in Colorado, a mountain and a creek. And the first one is to change the mountain to Mount Jerome. All of you Colorado historians know about Irene Jerome Hood, photographer back in the 1800s. And then Ute Creek, self-explanatory for the Ute tribe. Jefferson County is okay with these changes. Park County, which is just for the creek, is still pending. So we're getting close on that one. This one's from a private landowner, wants to rename a couple of teeny tiny little, sounds like ponds on his property. The currently VH Pasture Reservoir and Viral Reservoir. Those were two earlier landowners. He wants to change them to Elk Springs Reservoir and Wapiti Reservoir. County has no opinion. Again, he owns the property, but does it really give him the right to just change a name and remove a commemorative name? You have to decide if that's appropriate or not. Cimarron Peak is a new name. It's an unnamed feature, unnamed peak in Jefferson County. The county is okay with that one. Cimarron means wild or untamed. That was ready for a vote, so that might be your first easy one. Change Chinaman Gulch, this is Chaffee County, to Trout Creek Gulch. This one, the county said no. They adamantly opposed to changing the name. They said that the Chinaman is an honorific name and that it ties to the local history. And furthermore, Trout Creek Gulch isn't on Trout Creek. So they don't think the replacement is appropriate. So good luck with that one. A couple of Negro names, Negro Creek, Montezuma County to Hops Creek. Again, the reason for change is pretty self-explanatory. The reason for the replacement, this is the quote from the proponent, hops are used to brew beer, which is a booming industry in Colorado. Okay, fair enough. We wrote to the county commissioners. They responded that they agree the name should be changed. They recommend Clay Creek and for nearby Negro Mesa, which is not on the original proponent's list, but they recommend Clay Mesa. They worked with a local school and got the school children to look into the history of the area and decided that they liked Clay Creek and Clay Mesa better. So again, unless the original proponent withdraws Hops Creek, it's still on the table. Same proponent to change Negro Draw to Hops Draw, Montezuma County, same rationale. This one came in from, I think, the local government, I think. This is pretty straightforward. We've had Culkin's Lake on federal maps forever, and yet apparently the locals all call it Union Reservoir. That's Weld County. The only issue there is there's a tiny Culkin's Reservoir nearby, so we're not exactly sure why there's two features named for Culkin's, but nonetheless, everybody calls this Union Reservoir. And we haven't heard from the county yet, so it's still pending, but that's pretty straightforward, I think. It should be an easy one. Okay, just wrap up real quick. I got a couple slides on derogatory and offensive names, but really I've touched on a lot of this already. And it's sort of common sense to think about, you know, names are a part of the historical record. We prefer to proceed cautiously and conservatively regarding name changes. And as William asked and others have said, there needs to be a compelling reason to change a name. They need to state A, why it should be changed, but also what the replacement should be. We're not proactive. We don't go out looking for names to change. We don't even really encourage name changes. We're here to help, here to work with anybody that wants to change a name, but we don't go looking for names, nor do we, as the federal government, want to decide what is an offensive word. It's very subjective. And a word that might be perfectly acceptable in eastern states, some of the tribes still use the word squaw with no problem. You go down on the Navajo reservation, you see squaw dances, squaw bread, squaw gift shop. I mean, you don't want to be changing a name across the nation without local input. So it's how people in Colorado feel about these particular words. Again, not proactive. And whether you all want to be proactive and start looking for more work, that's up to you. case by case, obviously. We don't make sort of unilateral decisions on names. And it goes without saying, we don't approve a name, even if it is in local use, if it's clearly derogatory or offensive. We're not going to approve a new name. It's going to offend somebody. So it's pretty obvious. Again, anyone could propose a proposal, submit a proposal. Again, as I said earlier, you can't unname a feature. You must give a replacement. And ideally, the replacement name should retain some of the historical intent. Just one of the examples we saw earlier, Chinaman Gulch, if it were to be renamed, is there a Chinese family? Is there a story behind that name? Is there a better word you can choose that would retain the name, keep the history, not retain the name, retain the history, but while removing that offensive term? Don't just replace everything with oak, creek, or elk, or bear, or to be honest, even freedom or equality. The board doesn't like those kinds of feel good, patriot. Maybe patriot's appropriate in some places, but don't just simply, hate to say, whitewash the landscape, but come up with a replacement that really has some local meaning and significance and historical connection to the site. And that's where you all are going to have to do your homework, is to find names that are suitable replacements. Or agree that the proponent has done their homework and come up with a suitable replacement. These are some of the derogatory names the board's changed in recent memory. You see, these are all squaw names that got changed. And some of them you can see are in indigenous languages. And it has the name of the language it came from there. So some, very interesting, maybe challenging names to some people, but people can learn how to pronounce these, a little bit of practice. Other examples of offensive names that have been changed by the board in recent years. Again, I apologize, some of the words there you'll see, but there's some where the word itself is inherently offensive. Negro, half-breed, digger. Some of these names are obviously offensive. Others may not at first glance appear to be offensive. The word itself is not offensive. It's who it stands for. So Harney Peak in South Dakota, if you didn't know otherwise, you might not know that Harney Peak was named for General William Harney, who was notorious for slaughtering Indian women and children. And he's sort of like in the same league as maybe John Evans, the governor. Same with Jeff Davis Peak. That's for Jefferson Davis, Confederate general. That was recently changed. There's two of those. Nevada, Doso de Avi is a Shoshone name. And then down at the bottom, just a month before last, the board changed Jeff Davis Peak in California to Da Ekdal Go Et Mountain. That's a Washoe name. So you see how you can learn to pronounce these. And then tribal geographic names. We have a whole set of policies on dealing with tribal governments as a nation to nation. And this is something that I know that several of you are familiar with. Government outreach, a need for federal government to tribal government consultation. This is where it gets a little bit touchy with the states getting involved, because tribes are not obligated to interact with state agencies or vice versa. Federal agencies can't abrogate their responsibility to states to consult with tribes. We have to do it on a state to state, nation to nation basis. So basically we acknowledge the right of tribes to self-governance. And so if a feature is on a tribal trust land, we will defer to the tribe for the preference. So the tribe will have basically final say over the county and the state, to be honest. Because on tribal land, tribes get to decide the name. We provide opportunity for tribes to participate in the renaming effort, and we can assist tribes if they want to even go so far as setting up their own geographic names authority. They can. It hasn't happened yet, but we're here to help if they want to. It's a couple of federal executive orders talk about tribal consultation. Again, as I said, if it's wholly on tribal land, we will defer to the tribe, whatever name they want. If it's on non-tribal land, we will send a copy of that quarterly review list that I mentioned way early on. We send an email to all 574 federally recognized tribes every quarter and approximately 200 of the TIPOs, and invite them to comment on any name on that list in which they have an interest. So a tribe in Delaware Nation in Oklahoma could decide they have an interest in a stream name in Ohio because it was their traditional lands. And we're going to see that in Colorado. As you all know, there are tribes with an interest in Colorado that don't reside today in Colorado, but they have a right to comment on any feature in Colorado. We'll see, Mount Evans will see that because it was the Cheyenne and Arapaho that were the most impacted by the Sand Creek Massacre. And yet, neither one of those tribes have a home, shall we say, in Colorado today, but they still should be at the table for the discussion. So this is all going to be another whole topic of involving tribal governments. And if it features partly on tribal and non-tribal land, we obviously want everyone to work together to hopefully come up with something we all agree on. Almost done, I promise. This last slide is basically just some of the ongoing issues. This is mostly for Ms. Redhorse's benefit. For example, we'd like to record Native names if we can find them. We'd like to work with the tribal governments to have them share their knowledge with us, increase awareness within Indian country of the BGN and our policies. Again, increase direct communication. We're really working hard to find out better ways to involve tribes in our processes, encourage outreach, and again, awareness about the name change process and the importance to have them, with our help, research their history if they want to share their names. They may choose not to, but if they want to, we want to be there to help them. And with that, if you're all still with us, I'm done. Thank you so much for listening. I know it's a lot to get through, and again, you'll never have to go through this again, but it's there, and I'll share this if you all would like to use it later and look back at it if it would be at all helpful. So I will be quiet now. Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. We really appreciate you going over all that information. It was very informative, and even though this was the second time I've seen some of this, it's worthwhile for sure to understand what you do, and as we explore that relationship between this advisory board and what you work on at the federal level. So I want to open it up to any questions for Jennifer on that.
I had
presentation.
A question on the last slide before your information. When you said your office works with tribes to record the original names, is there a separate recording, or is there a precedence through consultation for those names? And might that be in your policies and procedures?
It is somewhat stated, and it's basically summarized in that one slide, to be honest, but it's basically a way of letting tribes know that while the majority of names in that GNIS database and on federal maps, those were the names collected by, let's just be honest, the white surveyors going out west or wherever, in the 1800s, collecting names, putting them on maps for the first time. Tribes were left out of the discussion early on. And we want to really, I think, do a better job of inviting tribes to share their histories and feel like they can put their names on federal maps too. And if they can demonstrate that a name has been in use by a tribe for some amount of time, chances are it can go right into the database without discussion, especially if that feature doesn't have a name currently. If they're looking to change a name, unless it's on tribal trust land, then yes, it would be a proposal like anybody else. The challenge, of course, with tribal names and native indigenous names is, we have a habit in the European community, so to ask for a map, show us a map or a published history, and we know that tribes have oral cultures. The names were passed down through their stories and their knowledge and their telling of the history. They're not recorded. There are not published maps from the 1800s of tribal lands for the most part. Now there are some. Actually, there are a lot that were compiled by surveyors and folks visiting the area and recording native names, and they probably didn't get it quite right, but they made their best effort. So if a name is published on an 1800s map or an early 1900s map of a tribal area, and it doesn't conflict with anything else, chances are, yes, we will put it directly in the database. If there's a lot of them, we might share the list with you all and say, hey, we've gotten these 20 names from so-and-so tribe. Could you take a look at them, see if you agree? It wouldn't require a formal vote per se. Probably would even go on our quarterly review list. Probably would even go to the BGN for a vote. But it's just a kind of a way of letting tribes know that we want to listen to them too. Again, they may choose not to share their names. We're not going to force the issue. Just for what it's worth, we had our names conference of 2015 in Anchorage. And the first day was all day of the native, Alaska Native Names workshop. And a lot of tribal governments came in, shared the maps they had been producing. It was amazing. They had these sound bites. They'd gone out and talked to the elders and recorded some of these place names. To be honest, we expected a deluge of submissions after that one-day meeting. It was a wonderful session. We didn't get a single one. You know, the feeling is that the tribes know what their names are for their places. They may not want to share them with the federal government for federal maps. That's their prerogative if they don't want to share them. But if they do want to, we want to make it as easy as possible. So, Patty?
Oh, Patty, you're on mute still.
You're on mute, Patty.
I was on mute, so I wouldn't misspeak. So I'm wondering about the division between the geographic and the man-made and cultural, because in so many other domains of practice, like natural park service is always trying to bring natural resources and cultural resources not so separate as domains. So that separation seems to me a little retro to, and I understand that it has to be made manageable. I totally get that if you're going to consider everything, every high school and so on. But I'm thinking about the reservoirs. You caught me by surprise when the reservoirs turned out to be natural, which they're as human constructed as the dam.
Exactly.
And so there are subtleties here that I'm not getting about that distinction. And then I'm thinking also about Native people and stories. Keith Basso's wonderful book, Wisdom Sits in Places, about how place names are abbreviations of narratives and stories that give people guidance. And so I just am not yet, I'm going to get there, but I'm not totally navigating the cultural and the geographic.
Sure.
And maybe, and Jim Enote at Zuni, who does those spectacular maps that have traditional knowledge but are created by contemporary people, that there's so much going on in sort of native ways of mapping. So anyway, so I'm just thinking about maybe a more porous, or maybe a day of chaos every year where the cultural and the geographical are thrown together and forced to work it out. So I hope that makes some sense about just, okay, the reservoirs are where I thought there's something more here that I'm catching on to.
It is difficult, and certainly back in the earliest days of the BGN, when we were the only game in town, you know, we were the ones that collected all the names from federal maps. You know, USGS was founded in 1879 and started mapping immediately, and so from that time up until really, you know, to the 80s and the 1980s and 90s, we were the only source for all geographic names for federal maps. So yes, we did our best to collect every named feature on the landscape, and that included the schools and the churches and so forth. The board never voted on them, but it was almost felt like it was somehow it was a manageable project, because somebody went through and collected all the names on all the USGS maps, including schools and parks and so forth. Put them in the database, or the paper listings as they were at the time. But it was, as soon as the Googles of the world came along, and then Microsoft and Esri and all these third-party mapping companies, and they clearly had the resources to collect these names, and USGS really kind of got out of the mapping business for a good, 25 years there. If you really have studied your USGS mapping history, you know, we were really into mapping the whole nation up until the late 70s, early 80s. And then it kind of stopped for a good 20, 25 years. And we let all our cartographers go, all the old map editors really knew the landscape. And we had surveyors out in the field collecting all these names, and we could keep up with them. But without that mandate to map the country, we lost the ability to start to collect the names and keep up with the names. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a staff of 2 on the BGN side. Now, there is also a GNIS database staff, which is right there in Lakewood at the USGS Center there. And it might be good at some point in the future, they could come and really talk about the database and the collection of names. We just found we just couldn't keep up. And now we've come to the sad realization that, to be honest, bad data is worse than no data. So to put out, names that are 30, 40 years old, it's just plain embarrassing. We just can't keep up. So there are other programs within USGS that are picking up a lot of that responsibility now, and we're getting very much into the volunteer geographic information, where we're having citizens submit new school names and parks and churches and police stations and libraries, and there's a whole long list of features they collect. So they'll still be on the topographic maps, but not through us. So rather than keep them in the database, we've decided to just get rid of them entirely. So again, that's coming in the next year. As far as reservoirs, and you're right, it is confusing. The simple answer really is that yes, while a reservoir is man-made, certainly, and you're absolutely right, there's nothing more man-made about it than you put up a dam and you create a reservoir. The problem is so many reservoirs were at one time natural lakes, and they've just been dammed over time. Somebody built a dam and impounded it, maybe not so much in Colorado, but around the country in general. It's just so hard to really, really distinguish between a reservoir and a natural lake. This may sound crazy, but for the longest time, Lake Tahoe was recorded in our database as a reservoir because it actually has a little impoundment where they can control the lake level. So by definition, Lake Tahoe is a reservoir, if you really look at it clinically as an impounded feature. But no one would argue that Lake Tahoe is anything but a natural body of water. And so the feeling was that because we can't really distinguish in a lot of cases between maybe what was a natural lake that became a reservoir, or you maybe see in the Pacific Northwest, for example, they're taking down a lot of the dam. And many of the dams are being taken down, sometimes to aid in salmon spawning. And so then you'd have what for 50 years has been a reservoir. It had a dam, and now it's been removed and it's allowed to go back to its natural state, so it becomes a lake again. So rather than try and sort of add names, remove names as their status changed over time, or again, because it required so much analysis case by case, the board made a decision at least 10, 20 years ago now that we would retain control over reservoir names. So that includes the little impounded pond on somebody's private property. That includes the major reservoirs that a city has built. Those we still vote on or collect from a published source if there's no conflict. You'll see the same thing with canals and channels. In a canal essentially may well have been a natural creek at one time, but it got channelized, so to speak, and they made a canal out of it. But at some point you might have a natural stream that flows part of its way through a canal. So we didn't want to remove it entirely and say it's not our job anymore. So rather than pass the responsibility to we didn't really know who, we retain the right to name reservoirs, canals, and channels. But we don't name the dam, which, yeah, it may seem really kind of ridiculous, but nothing says the dam name has to be the same as the reservoir name too. I mean, it could be different. We defer to the Corps of Engineers to let us know what the dam name ought to be. So those go in the database. So yes, it can be a little bit, there's sort of those wishy-washy areas where it may not make sense at first, but bottom line, reservoirs are our responsibility and will be yours too to vote on. Yeah. And as far as the cultural, geographic stuff, it's just a whole new world for all of us, I think, trying to capture indigenous geography. And the challenge can be sometimes that the way a tribe looks at a geographic feature or a point on the landscape might not be the same way that we traditionally would map a feature. You could have a 100-mile long river. A tribe traditionally might have lived just at one bend of that river, and that's what they call the river. It's just that small part that they're familiar with. They don't really know or care what a different tribe might name it 30 miles upstream or downstream. Or, and so it's not really a one-to-one relationship. Are they naming the river, or are they naming the bend? Are they naming the the land alongside the bend because it was meaningful to them. Maybe they had an early campsite there, or they, you know, hunting and gathering traditionals were there. Is it really the same name or a different name for the same place? If you look at a mountain, the tribe might have more significance with the slope of the mountain or the base of the mountain. They may not care what the peak is named. They may not care what the peak is named on the other side by a different tribal group or different group of settlers. They just care about the part they can see. So are they naming the mountain, or are they just naming the base of the mountain, the valley? As far as a stream, we record the primary point of a stream at the mouth, where it enters another larger stream or bay or lake. To a tribal government or native peoples, the source of the stream to them might be considered the primary point, where it's coming out of the earth, where you've got the spring, where they collected the water. To them, the source might be the primary point. They may not care what happens to the stream downriver where it enters another bay. So what are they really naming? Are they naming the spring, or are they naming the creek? So this whole view of tribal and native indigenous landscapes may be different from the way we map things. So that's another interesting discussion, I guess.
Great. Other questions for Jennifer?
Hey, Dan, it's Rick Garcia.
Yeah, please.
Hey,
continue.
Jennifer. I introduced myself earlier. I'm Dan's colleague on the governor's cabinet, the Department of Local Affairs. Quick question as it relates to the counties or the county representatives in the case of Colorado County Commissioners that oppose or approve certain geographic names changes. Does your group require a documented vote by the commission or also holding public hearings in order for them to take an official position?
No, not at all. No, we basically, how the county does its business is totally up to the county. It could well be they have a public hearing and put it on their monthly agenda for discussion and invite public comment. Minnesota has a very strict county hearing process. The proponent has to gather a petition signed by a minimum of 15 local residents of the county, and they have to even pay a small fee, and they submit it to the county auditor, who then puts it before the county commission. So yes, in Minnesota, they have a requirement that they must have a public hearing and a formal resolution. Many other states, no, the county government, how they come to their recommendation is totally up to them. It could be that the commissioners discuss it amongst themselves offline in the hallway and decide, yeah, we're okay with this, and they submit a response. And we do send out we have a very basic form, it's just a checklist. We approve, we do not approve, we have no opinion, or other comment. And that's where they could, if they wanted, submit another name instead. We don't require a county response. Obviously, it's ideal. We'd love to hear from the counties. If the county wants to issue a formal resolution, we'd love to see that. That's something you all are going to have to decide too, I think, is what level of expectation are you going to put on the local governments? And indeed, are you, in fact, you going to be the ones to contact the county governments for us? Or would you prefer that we keep doing it from the federal level? We've heard a couple of states tell us that counties don't pay attention when a state agency contacts them. You're more likely to get some attention from the feds. So can you guys contact the counties for us? So we hear that. We hear the gamut but I mean, the response rate from counties is probably 50–60%. I mean, it's nowhere near what we would like to see. But we're realistic enough to know that obviously county governments have a lot more important things on their plate than, for the most part, naming geographic places. I mean, they're all overwhelmed, especially this year. It's been particularly challenging. But when you're dealing with budgets and the new police chief and all the other county issues you deal with, we've heard geographic names can be sometimes the fun part of the meeting. I mean, it's just, they may invite the proponent to come and make a short presentation. They may have a formal vote after. They may issue a resolution. They may simply just pull out a piece of letterhead and sign it. They might just respond by email. We don't really question how they came to their decision. It's totally their business.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks.
Hey, just a follow-up to Rick's question. Have you ever taken a position that was more or less the opposite opinion of a local government or a county commission? And
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it doesn't happen too often. I would say, as Governor Polis said, I mean, obviously most times we do go along with the state and the county. I would say it's certainly way less than 10% that we ever contradict. And it's usually because, to be honest, there's not enough information in your meeting minutes, in the state's meeting minutes or the county resolution to give us anything to work with. Or the county might support a name that clearly violates one of our policies, or at least we feel doesn't meet the policy. It might be, unfortunately, you know, some of these smaller rural counties, you've got somebody who wants to name a feature for their father who moved to the area 5 years before he passed away, spent his last couple of years living on the property, really had no long-term association with the feature, didn't, I hate to say, didn't contribute anything to the community. I mean, he probably had a long career elsewhere in a different state perhaps, but maybe he just moved in with a family in his last couple of years of life, and the county might support it because they like the current family. They may have the same surname too, which doesn't help. Are you really honoring the father, or is it really a case of the proponent wants to honor themselves and they're just using their father's short time in the county as the honoree? And so the county might look at it and go, well, it looks okay to me. You know, the Smiths, they're nice people. Yeah, we support Smith Lake. And then when it comes to our board takes a look at it and says, we're really sorry, but Mr. Smith, you know, he had no association, no long-term association with the county or the feature. He just lived there a couple of years. We clearly don't want to honor the living family. And so our board will turn it down. So there are times, yes, when we feel that the county maybe didn't understand the nuances of our policies, or maybe we didn't explain it well enough, and we go back and say, did you really, well, we don't usually go back and say, did you really mean this? But we just ask for clarification. And then maybe a few times where the state will approve a name or disapprove a name, and our board doesn't agree and goes against you. We try and give you an opportunity to come back with further clarification before we actually vote. But yes, it's not, I mean, if it was 100% always agreement, you could argue why even have a state board, or why have a federal board for that matter, if we're always going to agree with each other. There's always going to be that room for negotiation and back and forth and debate and maybe disagreement. Yeah, sometimes it happens.
okay, other questions for Jennifer? Okay, I don't see any. Jennifer, please, you know, continue to stay in this meeting if you can. There may be some questions that will come up a little bit later, and we may invite you to a future meeting too, because I know
That's
you were
totally
sharing
up
a
to
lot
you.
of information.
Yeah, totally up to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next, let's move forward with conversations on board operating protocols. And as you all know, this particular board was created under our proclamation from the governor, and we invited Deputy Attorney General Amy Beatty to help give us a landscape of how this board should ideally look and operate. So Amy, the floor is yours whenever you're ready.
I'm going to work on sharing my screen. Give me a moment. Fantastic. Okay, can you all see that okay?
Yeah,
That's
Amy,
it?
you'll want to hit it from the beginning so you don't see the notes on the side there.
It's a bit, okay, hold on. Let me see if I can do that again. I have lost my ability to share the screen. Hold on, folks. Sorry.
I'm gonna, there you go. Go ahead and give it another try. You're doing fine.
work either. Hang on.
You know, Amy, we could also take just a quick break maybe too.
Yeah, and I'll help you, Amy. We could get it going during the break if you'd like.
That would be wonderful. Thank
Okay,
you.
let's just do a quick 5-minute break. Does that sound good? Okay, great. See you all in 5 minutes.